Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Video Learning Lab. Today, we're joined by Nelson Sivalingam, the CEO and co-founder of HowNow. He's the brains behind the learning platform that's helping employees learn what they need, when they need it, all around the world. Nelson is all about boosting performance and development. He's a regular face at conferences, a voice in the industry, and KPMG has even named him one of the top Asian stars in tech. That's definitely a title that I am looking to claim at some point in my career, so well done for you there. And he's also the author of this fantastic book, and I swear he didn't pay me to say this, but I'm a huge fan of Learning at Speed, How to Upskill and Reskill Your Workforce at Pace to Drive Business Performance. It's all dog-eared. Can't wait to tell you what we found, but Nelson, welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show, Kevin. And just listening to you there, the only thing I could think was, how can this guy have a face for TV and a voice for radio at the same time? That's unfair, man. That's unfair.
Listen, we'll take all the compliments we can get, and it's tough working at an AI video company where soon my likeness will just replace me completely. But listen, I know since we last spoke, you've been incredibly busy. You went to World of Learning. You're growing HowNow. Meanwhile, on the Synthesia side, we're also coming out of conference season in the US, and all of the tech, the talks, and the keynotes has been about AI strategy and skills in the L&D world. So to kick us off, can you tell us what's the big topic in your world regarding AI skills in L&D? What are you seeing?
Big question to kick things off, Kevin. I
Yes.
think the most common question I get asked these days is this hype for real? Right? Because I think people have seen the Web 3.0, the metaverses, the crypto, and we often talk about it internally that there are real trends and then there are real trends that are happening. And this is very much real, and it is a fundamental paradigm shift. And I think to put that into context, I still think we're so early in this process. The most of the AI application you're seeing within L&D and HR is very much it's like using a Ferrari to go to your local supermarket, right? You're not really putting it to use, and you're just doing the thing that you were always doing already. And so, a large part of what we're seeing right now is, we were creating 1x content, now we're creating 10x content, right? But I don't ever remember the fundamental problem being not enough content. And so I think we're still in that phase of shiny new toy. We're excited. Let's play around with it. Let's see what it can do, what it can't do. And I think we're at the beginning of going back to the fundamental question of, like, what is the problem, right? What were the biggest problems? And what were those biggest problems we couldn't solve before efficiently and effectively that AI now gives us an unfair advantage to solve? And there are many of those, right? And just to kind of throw a few out there, one is from a skills perspective. I mean, one of the hardest, we talk about trying to upskill and reskill the workforce, yet most organizations don't measure and track skills within the organization. So how can you move a number that you don't measure in the first place? And the reason a lot of companies don't do that, it's a challenging thing to do. What skills should they have? To what level of proficiency should they have it? And then mapping that back to your learning ecosystem. Now, if you break that down into kind of sub problems, AI has a significant impact on that. The problem of at HowNow we're doing it, we're using AI to essentially map skills to every individual based on their work history, their job role, and we're able to tell you this is the target proficiency level they should have, right? So a problem that you would have previously solved by getting a consultant for 12 months who would create a job to skills mapping, and then someone's job would be to keep it up to date. It's gone, right? Mapping your entire learning ecosystem to your own skills ontology and would have been quite a tough challenge before. It isn't anymore. And to identify those moments of need, have you just been promoted? Are you about to go into a sales pitch? To be able to collect that data from across the organization and to be able to nudge you with the most relevant learning in those moments of need is now for real. We can do this with AI. Every single person having their own dedicated AI coach who's trained on your organization's methodology, right? Trained on how you do sales, how you do marketing in your company. And so I think it is a fundamental shift. It will disrupt every single aspect of how we think about L&D and how we implement L&D in our organization. But what we're seeing right now is just largely the bells and whistles and, this cool thing you can do.
I'm curious, from your perspective, are there any specific areas within L&D that are ripe for those first experiments using AI-enabled tools? I think you already had mentioned skills mapping. That's something that's done within seconds by an AI-enabled tool versus a human consultant. Are there other areas that you're seeing that are low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, so I'd say actually not a direct consequence of AI, but a very significant side effect of it is we're all going to get very used to getting things done by asking in natural language, right? The chat interface will become our default. And that opens up an opportunity, not just within L&D, but every product category that exists that doesn't have a chat first interface, because now we're going to look at our user experience all primarily from starting from a chat interface. And so if you apply that to your learning platform, the bet we kind of look forward and see is we think that will change to, whether you introduce a new chat interface or the primary point of entry becomes your existing chat interface, your Slacks, your Teams, and there's a kind of back engine that's doing the work. But I think whether it's discovery or whether it's creation, whatever aspect of that end-to-end, if you were to map every job to be done for an L&D manager or a head of L&D, I think every single one of those jobs to be done will be executed with a natural language ask, right? And so I think that's a significant side effect that we don't often talk about. But I think the low-hanging fruit is the learning ecosystem, and I cover this in my book, but the idea that, if I was to ask you, Kevin, to think about the last time you learned something that had a big impact on your career and performance. So think about that. And I want you to put your hand up if it happened inside an LMS. Right? Now, yeah. I've asked this question many times in a room full of L&D people.
And sorry to interrupt, for those who are listening, my hands are still glued to my side, so apologies.
And I've asked this question in a room full of L&D people. They don't put their hand up, they chuckle, because everyone realizes the irony that they're all going to buy an LMS at some point. They're all going to force their employees to go to the LMS, yet it's not where we go to do our learning. But if I said, was it from a book? Was it from a webinar? Was it from a podcast? Was it from a colleague? Now you start to see hands going up. And what that tells us is the learning ecosystem is broad, diverse, inside the organization, outside the organization. And the big challenge there is each one of those sources tagged and organized this content in very different ways, right? If I was to take a content library like Udemy or LinkedIn Learning, even between them, they have a very different skills taxonomy and way of tagging their content versus informal learning like YouTube or a blog. Now, that makes it very difficult for you to connect the right learning back to the skills gap that you're trying to close, because it's not a standardized skills framework. And this is what Google did for the world's knowledge, right? They made a standardized way of organizing it so it's easy for me to find that's meaningful to me. AI allows us to do that within an organizational context, right? It allows us to apply these LLMs to the knowledge and learning resources and skills that you have inside and outside of your organization, map it back to your own skills ontology. And now I can clearly say this YouTube video is helping you build this skill, which is already a part of your framework and required for your role. And we can be predictive about it, right? We can start to say, you might not need this now, but in 12 months' time, the way this industry is being disrupted, this is an emerging skill. And to build this emerging skill, you're going to need this. So I think that, which is quite a challenging, human-intensive process previously, will now be a matter of moments before we're able to precisely connect someone with the right bit of learning at that right moment for the right person.
You also call to mind kind of this transition from of workplace learning going from the LMS, which is very assignment based learning where it's often a course or it's replicating maybe a lecture style class where someone is just kind of pushing information to you. We move on into LXPs and recommendation engines, and then it becomes now there's more informal learning. And I think what we're all headed towards is that idea of how do we empower workers, employees to self-direct their learning. But I think to what you're saying, what has changed, and I think this is that huge shift is you're able to, maybe you don't have to ask the question. You're not doing search and retrieval as if from Google. You don't know what your destination is. You're more curious about, okay, this is the current problem I'm facing. I'm going to use a large language model to converse with information and knowledge, and then it's going to set me off on maybe a pathway that I didn't have intended, but it's providing me solutions for the obstacles I'm encountering in the moment, rather than kind of that old school way of just saying, "Hey, I have this knowledge that you are assigned and need to know." It's more self-directed, and that's what large language models kind of allow for. Is that too broad of an assumption?
No, I think that's along the right track. And I think just to put it into context with people kind of tracking this journey, if we go back, like AI isn't new. And I think that's a very important thing to call out because, we have a story of how when we first started out, we used to really talk about the AI algorithms we had to drive recommendations. And we realized it used to scare a lot of HR and L&D stakeholders
Mm.
off. Like they were like, oh, this town's too, I don't know if our people are ready for this. And so we decided, actually, from a messaging and sales perspective, we shouldn't shout about the AI. Let's just shout about the outcomes and benefit. And I feel like we've come around where now people want to hear about there. They want to understand. It's almost like a new trend, but it isn't. What the significant shift that's happened is if you think about AI 5 years ago as almost a human with a short attention span, right?
Mm.
And so let's take something as basic as translation. If I was translating a phrase, the previous models that we had would do one word at a time, right? It couldn't do words in parallel, and it couldn't look at the overall phrase. It couldn't do all of these things in parallel to understand the broader context. That's why sometimes you would do a Google Translate and it was literally word for word, and actually the sentence doesn't make sense in the other language.
Mm.
Now what we have is almost the equivalent of a human with an incredible attention span, with the ability to keep learning at a speed that we've not really seen before, which means we can now interpret it and analyze things in parallel. Now, what does this mean from an L&D context? Is if you look at the layers of data that we already have in our organization, right? Like, let's compare personalization based on, I did course A, therefore I think you would like course B. Let's say that was AI algorithms 5 years ago. What we're able to do now is look at every data point within your, I could see, okay, from your productivity systems, I could see you done X, Y, Z. You sent messages outside of the hour. I can see that you did this in your previous work history. I can look at 70 people who are similar to you who also did ABC. Now we're crunching 100 data points in that very moment to deliver something relevant to you. And it's obvious what that does. It means our ability to deliver something relevant to you is just now growing exponential, right? And that does mean, we often talk about the best kind of search is no search. And,
Mm.
one thing is being able to ask. Another thing is using this data to be able to preemptively nudge you with saying, we can see you're about to do that. We can see you're about to have your first career conversation with your direct report. We think this is going to be a useful guideline for you to be able to have a good conversation. And I can check
Mm.
in after you've had that conversation to go, how did it go? It sounds like you could have done ABC better. So maybe have a look at this. That's where we're going.
Yeah, the metaphor that it brings to mind is we've been living kind of in the maybe in like the two-star hotel territory where you have to phone down to the desk or you have to go and get things yourself. But now we're living more in the 4 or 5 star territory where, based off of the information that that the hotel knows about you, they're already serving you a drink and a towel as you get out of the pool. So that that context makes it much more gives the tech a better ability to serve up the solutions that not only that you're looking for at the moment, but that you could be as well. So I think that's a great framing for it. Can you? I'm a huge fan of this book, and I want to make sure that we dedicate some time to talk about this. I one of the reasons that I love the book is not just the title, "Learning at Speed," but I think it also applies product mindset and methodology and other business practices to our space. And I think when I was entering the L&D space, it was more framed around training and delivering services or courses, but this is much more of I think like a learner-centric, product-centric view of what is it actually we're delivering to the business. And so before we get into that, can you set us up a little bit and tell us a bit about the book? Why did you even write this in the first place?
Yeah, it came from prior to starting HowNow. I'd never been in the L&D space, right? My only experience of L&D was as the customer, as a learner, right?
Yes.
And the one thing that me and my co-founders, one of the things we have in common is we've all been victims of really bad training in L&D in the organizations
Yes.
we worked in. So we knew what bad looked like. And so when we came into this space and we were kind of having conversations to really kind of dive deep and learn about this space and learn about how L&D professionals are thinking about the space, I saw a lot of parallels between startup founders and L&D professionals. Sounds very strange, but I saw a lot of parallels in the problems they were trying to tackle. And what I mean by that is essentially the product as an L&D professional you're selling is learning, right? It's learning is the thing they're hiring to get a job done. It's not the outcome. It's the means to an end, right? No one's learning for the sake of learning, and they're not learning because they want to complete that learning. They're doing it because they want to get something. They want to get the skills to progress in their career. There are other outcomes they're trying to drive. So L&D's product was learning. But much like a startup founder with a product, it's about seeing, okay, who's the right customer for this product, right? So who's the right audience for this learning? How do I get it to them? That distribution point, what's the best way of getting it to them? How do I measure if it's having real impact, right? That they're going to keep coming back. They're going to keep renewing with me. So I started seeing a lot of parallels between how I would think about building a startup. And then I realized in the startup world, like startups have a lot of uncertainty baked into them in day one, right? You don't know if you have the right product. You don't know who your customers are. You don't really have much money. And so therefore you have to very quickly figure out all of those things and all of those answers before you run out of money. And so what the startup community has done really well over many, many, many years is they've built frameworks and mental models that help optimize the speed at which they learn, right? They have a lot of these mental models to help you minimize the mistakes, to test, iterate, learn, and figure out what product is going to work for what customers so you can scale your startup before you run out of money. And I started seeing the opportunity where a lot of those mental models and frameworks I thought could be used by L&D people. They just needed adapting, right? They needed adapting for the context in which L&D operated. So we started doing that with our customers, right? And where we realized we had quite a different approach from a technology perspective to solve the learning problem. But we realized very quickly tech alone is not going to solve the problem, right? You can't introduce a new bit of tech with the same old playbook and expect different results. So we realized we needed to also change the playbook if this is going to work. And so we started writing our own playbook based on these mental models and frameworks and adapting that. We started getting really good feedback from our customers, right? Like, for example, we adapted the business canvas into the learning canvas to help you design and communicate and test your strategy. We started using this with customers and customers loved it. They were telling us the feedback they were getting from their C-suite stakeholders and, how it helped them identify gaps. And that's when we started going, wow, maybe there's something in this.
Yeah.
And so as we did it with more and more customers, it became a very tried and tested playbook with many elements to it. And then basically why I decided to write it was we were growing very fast as a company, especially during the kind of lockdown COVID period. And I was like, I can't be the one to keep rolling this out. And I need to figure out a way. I needed to capture and document this so more people in my team would be able to scale this out. And in the process, I started thinking, maybe other people can benefit. I'm not that precious that only our customers should get this stuff.
Sure.
Like if all L&D professionals were using somewhat some of the things that we've created and we've implemented, it's a benefit for all of us, right? At least they're
Yeah.
thinking the way that we think is the better way to think about L&D, and that's really where the book came from.
I'm well, one question that I was pondering as I was going through the book was I was curious about who it's for because I think it's a very strong relationship, that parallel between an L&D department and a startup, but I also think that um, L&D teams are also in various stages of maturity. Some are maybe even just a one-person team. Some of them are legacy teams at a large enterprise. But I did find that the tools that you explain and use to describe the lean learning methodology apply. And so I'm curious who you had in mind when you were thinking about who would be the best fit for the lean learning methodology in those reading this book.
Yeah, I didn't think the size of the company came to me so much, because I thought actually we had used this with companies that are 200 people, and we've used this with companies who've got more than 100,000 people, and the kind of principles and the framework scaled, right? Because the frameworks are based on first principles. It strips away the assumptions and takes you back to the fundamental problems that we're trying to solve in L&D. However, when I was writing it, what I wanted to make clear was, although it's primarily for the L&D professional, I don't believe L&D is necessarily one function's ownership, right? L&D to me is an organizational capability, right? Can your company learn at speed and develop and grow? That's an organizational capability. And so it's for everyone who's involved in creating that organizational capability. L&D professionals are one of them. Your people managers, your kind of senior stakeholders. There's so many different people in the organization. And that's why I was very clear. I wasn't writing a scientific journal. This wasn't about education theory. It's underpinned by a lot of science and education, but this is more of a business book, right? I wanted it to be a step-by-step guide that a people manager can take. I could be the head of customer service at an organization, and I want to drive learning at speed within my function. You could read and implement that, right? You don't have to be an L&D professional to be able to do it. So I think that's the only thing I was thinking about from an audience perspective. I didn't want it to be just for the L&D professional, but it's anyone who contributes to building that org-wide capability.
I think what you mentioned there is so valuable because while every team likes to think that they are special in the organization, I do think that L&D is one of those teams that actually is, and maybe that's my own bias, but by that I mean that in the rest of the organization, it doesn't really sit so much on the tree. It's commonly known that there's not a learning leader that has a seat at the has a seat at C level, but it is kind of this in the spider web of the tree where it connects to all of the different parts of the organization, and that the outcomes that it's supposed to deliver on are reliant, like you said, on the organization itself. And so I think what you're saying about this lean learning methodology, it's not just for L&D teams, it's to get everybody on the same page about how they're delivering learning across the organization. And just to echo also what you're saying about the business canvas or the learning canvas in this context, I think for my own team and the educational initiatives that I'm trying to drive here at Synthesia, it's been a great way to just say, hey, this is how we're scoping out a project. These are all the stakeholders that are involved. And this becomes the reference for what we're actually trying to achieve, including the different stakeholders, the different resources. So that's in the book. I definitely suggest that folks check that out. I think
I was just going to say, I was
yeah.
just going to add to what you were saying there, Kevin, because I might also be biased, but I do think L&D are special. And the reason why I think that is where, for example, engineering team and the concepts and the work they do, someone in the sales function might not be able to relate to that, right? They might not be able to relate to the outcomes of what engineers are working on, and vice versa, right? I've got engineers who might not really get what sales are doing. Yeah, they're winning deals, etc. But the language and everything. But actually, what L&D inherently have learning is a universally understood concept with a universally understood outcome. Like every function doesn't have that, right? Whereas without much explanation, every other function will get what L&D does. And so it's almost, but this is why I think it's very interesting what's happened in L&D. Because L&D, I think, started off at its premise as a universally understood, something that the rest wider organization understands. But somewhere along the journey, we've decided to go into having our own jargon and our own language that the rest of the organization isn't as relatable, right? We started talking about course completion and time spent learning, which the reality is the engineer and the salesperson don't care, right? And so I feel like we had the opportunity to speak that universal org-wide language, and somewhere along the line we've gone off track. But I feel we have an opportunity now to bring it back, and that's why skills is so important, because skills is that language, right? And every employee gets skills. They get it if they have the skill, they don't have the skill, or they need to build the skill. Every business stakeholder, your C-suite, gets skill. They get it if there's a skills gap in the company, which is stopping them from executing on a particular strategic initiative. And L&D gets skills, right? And HR gets skills. And so I think we're almost, interesting enough, finding that language again to make us universal. And so I think that is why L&D do have a special place in the organization.
This brings up a very interesting topic that I've been having with learning leaders, where there is that frustration around how you're being measured or how you're being perceived by the rest of the organization. And it's a bit of a polarizing question, but what do you, some folks have said the approach is to rebrand L&D. It's like we're about people and experiences, where we're curating content and creating events for knowledge exchange. So people and experience rather than L&D. Or there's some who've just said we're just going to relaunch L&D and kind of almost as a new product or service and reintroduce ourselves to the company. So a rebranding. So we have almost like reconstruction, we have rebranding, and then there are those who are saying maybe there's a third category that is, hey, we need to redefine the language that we're using and reestablish kind of our value to the business, but in a very slow and steady way. I'm curious if you have any opinions on where L&D should go next because of what you just described, where we've lost that language or we've lost that perception of value. How do we address that?
Yeah, so definitely in agreement that L&D needs a rebrand, right? But this rebrand isn't just we've got a new brand color, we've got a new logo, but actually everything behind it is the same. That's not what I mean.
Sure.
It needs a rebrand because the internal perception in many organizations, ask your friends who are not in L&D, right, who work for other companies. Ask them, what does L&D do in your company? I ask this question many times when I'm explaining to someone what I do for a living. And most of the responses I get is, yeah, they send me an email to chase me to do compliance every so often. Yes. Right? Mm-hmm. That's most people's perception of what L&D is within their organization, right? It's either a 2-day training event or it's compliance and getting chased to do it, right? And if that's the internal brand that you have, it becomes very difficult, even when you do start doing good stuff, which is, tied to it, to get that engagement and buy-in from stakeholders, to get the budget, to get employees to engage. It becomes very difficult because what they've been used to in your company is you chasing me for compliance. And now all of a sudden you're saying, come here and do some self-directed learning. And I'm thinking, I don't trust your self-directed learning because all you've ever given me is click, click, click e-learning content. That's rubbish. And so it does need a shake-up to almost say, guys, no, it's a new brand, right? New learning brand. What this is about. What's in it for you? That's what we don't communicate effectively enough, right? Why should they care about your rebrand? And as a part of the rebrand, it's telling them, this is why you need us here, right? We're going to help you learn faster than the rate at which the world is changing, right? And what does that mean for you? Well, it means you're never going to be redundant. You can always reskill. You can always grow in your career. And that's what's in it for you. How are we going to do that? And then we go into changing the language about how we're going to do that. We don't talk about, I'm going to give you some courses, right? We talk about, we're going to help you build the skills you need. And that's a key shift, right? The key shift there is right now, a lot of organizations are very content first, right? And what I mean by that is what dictates what they do is what content do they need and how am I going to get that content to them? But actually what we need to be asking is a very skills first approach, which is what skills do they need and how am I going to help them build those skills? It's a very different question, right? It's no, and it changes what we measure because it's like, I mentioned this in the book around counting steps, right? Until we had smartwatches and Fitbits, this concept of 10,000 steps, how many people ever mentioned it? You didn't, right? And so you achieve what you measure. The moment you started counting steps, we now talk about 10,000 steps. We're focused on getting 10,000 steps. And so you achieve what you measure. And if you're measuring course completion, that's what you're going to achieve, not real value for the organization. But if you're measuring, are we building the skills to drive performance in our organization and get work done, then that's what you're going to achieve. That's what the business cares about. And I think that rebrand is changing all of those things. Now, can you do it overnight? No. But also that doesn't mean we can't start to rip up things. Like there are certain things that we're doing right now, we should have ripped up a very long time ago. And so if you're still doing it, it's probably holding you back. It's holding back you and the organization. So there are certain things I think we should be quick to rip up, and certain things we need to take our business on a journey with us on. But yeah, L&D definitely needs a rebrand.
Look, that's a perfect segue into, I think, the questions is, first off, what are 3 things that L&D needs to let go of?
Cool. Just 3 things. All right. I think the first thing is our kind of urgency to rush to a solution, right? We're very output focused, right? And I think where that comes from is historically in many teams today, L&D feels undervalued in the organization, right? Like we just mentioned this kind of seat at the table and this kind of constant conversation around, are we valued? Do we have a seat at the table, etc.? And as a result of that, there's kind of, you feel like you're being scrutinized and you need to demonstrate value, but that's kind of ended up with us doing the wrong things. We rush to put output out, right? We think showing value is, I created 100 courses. So, if my boss was to come and ask and go, L&D, what have you been doing? I could turn around and go, well, I bought a library with a gazillion courses and I also built 100 training programs. Look, I've been doing a lot of work. And so that's been our way of kind of showing our value is output. But actually the conversation is now changed. The business doesn't care how much output you put. What they're going to ask you is, okay, did you help us keep people? Did you help us achieve that strategic initiative that we've been working on? How did you contribute to that, right? When you get asked that, output is not going to answer that question. And so we need to shift from output to outcome focus. And that might mean you're no longer creating 100 courses, but you're creating the one course that actually had a significant impact on a certain part of the business. So I think that's the first shift. Let's let go of the outputs. Let's take the time to really focus on the outcome. And kind of connected to that is what we measure, right? Going back to what I mentioned earlier, is let's recognize that tracking enrollments, views, completion is good leading indicators. But what the problem is right now is we're stopping there, right? All that tells us is, did people find the course? Did they stay long enough? Did they engage with that learning resource, right? But we don't know whether that learning resource was what they needed to address that problem they had, right? Like if they were really bad at negotiating and they completed your negotiation course, but they were still bad at negotiating, does it matter? And are you measuring the fact whether they got better at negotiating or not, right? So that's the second thing I'd say is let go of stopping at the leading indicators. Let's do the leading indicators, but let's continue that journey. Let's continue that to actually look at whether we're moving the needle. Are we driving behavior change? That's what learning is, right? Yet we don't measure the behavior change. And so I think moving on to that, And then the third thing you can change today is the language you use to talk about the work you do in your organization, right? Going back to what I mentioned about using a language the business understands, is another key one, right? And a big part of that is also explaining what's in it for them again, right? Don't tell them, I just launched a great new LMS, come and use it. They don't care, right?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
curious. Using the language of the business, I think uh, in the worst case scenario, someone who's listening to this, who's in L&D, watches an episode of Succession and then comes back and then, is saying, what's the 30,000-foot view of this? Who's going to quarterback that? Because I've seen that happen in certain situations where you want to be taken more seriously, and so you start speaking like the sales team. But how can you get that vocabulary if it's not inherent to you at the moment?
Yeah. So let's take a specific example, right? Let's say I'm trying to put together a business case as an L&D team to get some budget to do that. I'd recommend structuring that business case not based on like it's got the value is it's got 1 million courses, right? Which is I've seen this, right? I've seen people trying to pitch a business case going, this is why we should put budget in because it's got 1 million courses and it should cater for every need, right? I'd structure it instead on 3 whys, right? So the first why is why now, right? That's what a business, especially now in this current economic climate, the first question you're going to get is why now, right? Like, can't we wait another 24 months to do this? And that we can explain not in a way where from an L&D focus, right? It's not coming from me. This is important for me, right? What we need to shift the mindset is go, why is this important for you now? And so how we typically recommend you do this is most of us hate change. Even the people who say they like change are lying to you. They hate change, okay? But the only thing that changes people who hate change is a big change, right? It's a big change that makes the current status quo completely unacceptable, right? Sticking with the current status quo means even more risk than changing. Therefore, you have to change. And so when you're explaining that why now, what is that big change? Has your attrition gone up? Has there been new competitors who come onto your market? Has there something significant that shifted in your industry? Has this big change happened, right? And now explain to me, how does that make the current status quo unacceptable? That's the first part. It's the why now piece. And then we go to why your solution, right? And this is where you say, okay, I buy into it. I get your big change. I get why the current status quo is unacceptable. Now you need to tell me what's the obstacle that's stopping you from addressing that, right? Well, I can't do anything about this employee attrition because I don't know. No one can find our learning, right? They can't find relevant learning, and whatever that obstacle is. Now you pitch your solution, right? You go, you agree we should do something because you're bought into the why now. You also agree there's a genuine obstacle in the way that's stopping us from doing that. Now I'm primed. I'm ready to go, okay, your solution. But the key thing is to explain how is it that your solution is going to help me overcome that obstacle. Often we don't do that, right? We just go, this is going to solve everything. But how? The third why is why not? And this helps you speak the business's language. Why not is the best way to strengthen your business case is by finding the holes in your business case yourself, right? And so this is where we go, okay, if I pitch this to my CEO, what's my CEO going to go? All right, they might have the fear of messing up, right? Do we have the people for it? Do we have the capabilities? Have you got the bandwidth? It might be, are our people ready for this? Do we have the tech stack? It could be a bunch of different things. Think of all of those things and think of what those responses are. And when you bring that together, what you end up with is a narrative that it doesn't matter which part of the business you're pitching to, it's a story they can understand. And so I think it's things like that we can do to make sure it's not about sending a message. It's about understanding whether the message has been received. And we often don't wait around to check whether that's happened.
That's incredible. Even as you were going through the three whys, it was easy for me to even fill in my own current initiatives that I'm working on and say, this is a very easy way to package this message. And I think that's where a lot of learning teams miss the mark, which is communicating what it is exactly that they're doing, what they're delivering on. And then I like this idea of why not, where it reminds me almost of. I don't know if you know Chris Voss, negotiation person, who is saying, I'm thinking of all of the reasons this could go wrong so that you could see one, that I've thought them through, but also that it takes away the oxygen of an argument against your own argument when you put that out there. So I think that's a very clever way to wrap that up. I'm curious, as we are wrapping our time, there's so many things that I want to pull out from your book: the minimum viable learning, the moments that matter, how to use the learning canvas and apply the lean learning methodology. Is there one takeaway that, there's so many things that you teach in this in your book? Is there one thing that you want folks to take away after reading this?
Yeah, I guess it's a very startup message actually, but it's to do what matters, right? In the startup world, you often see, you know, build stuff that matters, do what matters, and there's this constant narrative around, don't waste your time doing things for the sake of doing things, but do what matters. And I think in essence, that's what the book is about, right? It's the kind of step-by-step guide to help you do what matters, right? How do we help people build the skills that matter within the shortest time is in essence what lean learning is about. And so we're able to reduce waste. And what I mean by waste is every time you build something or buy something and it has no impact on your business performance, is waste of time, resources,
Yeah.
right? And the whole approach around lean learning is how do you minimize that waste, and really giving you the guide and also the kind of operating principles for doing that. So the takeaway really is do what matters, and hopefully these mental models and frameworks guide you through that process to get to that. Given the time of year where we're at, towards the end of the year, and I know a lot of teams right now are working on their 2024 strategy and thinking about priorities, and we're working with a lot of our customers using the learning canvas to map out their 2024 strategies. So if you're going to start anywhere, I'd say start with that, right? The canvas is a great way for you to kind of capture your priorities, test them, and also communicate it widely across the organization. So, do what matters. And as an immediate point to take off on, I'd say start with a canvas.
For sure, and we'll post some similar resources. I'm not sure if there's a public facing version of
There
the
is,
learn. There is.
yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
So we'll make sure that we post that in the show notes, because I think it's a slight adjustment, but the language helps, moving from just the business model canvas to the learning canvas. There's you're talking about the specificity in language, and I think that's helpful there. Nelson, this has been so incredible to have you on. I'm curious if folks want to. It's a silly question, but where can folks find the book, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find the book pretty much in every bookstore where you probably normally buy your books. And so, search for Learning at Speed and you'll see it there. And you'll find me on LinkedIn is probably the best place to get hold of me. It's probably where I'm most responsive. I'm more the lurker on Twitter/X. But yeah, if you want to get in touch, I would say LinkedIn. And if you are reading the book or you decide to read the book after this, I'm always keen to hear any questions, thoughts, feedback, and more than happy to help on how you can adapt some of these mental models and frameworks for your organizational context. So do feel free to get in touch. My email address is super simple. It's nelson@gethownow.com. So not that complicated if you do want to reach out on email too.
Sounds good. So we'll be sure to include those in the show notes. Again, Nelson, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.